In Florida, the sun was scorching as always, even though it was late October. The palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze as Mark and Leslie Goodwin gathered at the Ritz-Carlton Sarasota, where they were to be married in a few hours. The long-awaited day came at the end of intense months of preparation. Everyone said the couple seemed perfect, both successful, both attractive. Their relationship looked to be the envy of many. But behind the facade of a happy couple, there was something dark that no one even realized. Mark Goodwin was a successful attorney in Tampa, known for his high-profile cases and confident stance in the courtroom. He attracted attention not only with his career, but also with his charisma that drew people in. The wedding was attended by his colleagues, influential businessmen and attorneys he had known over the years. Leslie, on the other hand, was more reserved. Working in real estate, she was also successful, but her interests were primarily home and family. Many in her circle knew her as a caring and devoted woman, but some noticed flashes of jealousy that she couldn't always hide. On her wedding day, everything seemed perfect. The morning sun shone down on the white tents that had been set up on the hotel grounds, reflecting in the blue of the ocean. Guests began to move in a couple hours before the ceremony. Everything went according to plan until Mark and Leslie went off in different directions to prepare for the ceremony. By late afternoon, however, a storm was brewing. Not a natural one, a personal one, in which both parties found themselves hostage to long-accumulated emotions. The bride, as expected, looked flawless, dressed in a designer dress for thousands of dollars. But underneath that flawlessness was anxiety. Friends and family noticed Leslie's tension from the morning. Some of her friends noticed that she was unusually silent. Others considered it a simple nervous tension before the wedding. In reality, Leslie's mind was spinning with thoughts she couldn't dismiss. The day before the wedding, Leslie received an anonymous text message. It said that Mark had been cheating on her for months with a young assistant from his law firm. The name on the message was familiar to Leslie. Her intuition had been telling her this for a long time, but she had no direct evidence. She tried to hide her suspicions, but they continued to eat away at her from the inside. The ceremony was flawless, and everyone present noticed Leslie smiling demurely as she accepted congratulations. She held herself in check, though her chest was throbbing with a rage she couldn't stop. All she could do was wait for the right moment. Her plan had matured hours before the gala, and she was sure of every step. The evening banquet turned out to be the perfect cover for what she had in mind. By midnight, the guests began to disperse. Only the closest friends and family members remained at the hotel. A small private bar was set up in one of the conference rooms where the newlyweds and their close friends continued to celebrate in a more informal setting. The atmosphere was relaxed. Everyone thought the day had gone perfectly. But Leslie watched Mark's every move. She saw him chatting casually with his colleagues, drinking glass after glass of champagne. Everything looked normal, but she knew it was just a mask. At one point, Mark stepped away from his guests to make a phone call. Leslie waited a few minutes and, after making sure no one was watching, followed him. There were many small, empty rooms in the hotel where they could hide from prying eyes. Leslie knew where Mark was going. He had gone into one such room earlier to work on some documents he had accidentally left in his room. She followed him quietly, like a predator waiting for the right moment to attack. When she entered the room, Mark was sitting with his back to the door talking on the phone. Leslie moved closer, and at that moment Mark turned around. She caught a look of surprise on his face, and then saw his eyes widen in horror. In Leslie's hands was the small silver pistol she had bought months ago, fearing a possible attack after one of Mark's cases. She raised the weapon, and at the same second, a gunshot rang out in the room. Mark collapsed to the floor, his body twitching in convulsions. Leslie stood staring at him without any emotion. She finally had an answer to all her questions. At the same minute, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was walking toward the room. Leslie instantly realized that she was almost out of time. She stashed the weapon in the pocket of her dress and left the room through another exit, leaving Mark to die on the floor. Meanwhile, laughter and music continued in the hotel lobby. None of the guests suspected that a murder had taken place just a few meters away from them. Leslie returned to the table where her friends were sitting, pretending that nothing had happened. She knew that sooner or later they would be looking for her, but for the moment she managed to remain calm. Her plan had almost succeeded, and she was ready for the next step. A few minutes later, one of the guests noticed that Mark hadn't been seen in a while. Anxiety hung in the air, but no one made any sudden movements. One of Mark's friends, a lawyer named Robert, decided it was worth checking to see where the groom was. He walked down the hallway and came across an open door. As he entered the room, he saw Mark's body on the floor. Blood was spreading on the carpet and his eyes were empty. The second Robert jumped out into the hallway and called for help. An ambulance was called immediately, but it was too late. When the paramedics arrived, Mark was dead. The police quickly began examining the crime scene, interviewing guests. At first, it looked like a random attack, but soon investigators began to suspect that it wasn't that simple. Surveillance cameras at the hotel captured Leslie entering the very same room shortly before the gunshot rang out. Leslie remained where she was, pretending she knew nothing. She confidently communicated with the police, claiming to have been elsewhere at the time of the murder. But her calmness soon began to make investigators suspicious. She was too collected for someone whose husband had just been murdered. Within hours, police officers conducted a thorough search of the room. The gun that had been used to shoot Mark was found in a trash can near the hotel. The gun was registered to Leslie, which only made her situation worse. The investigation continued to gain momentum, with more and more evidence pointing to her involvement. By morning, Leslie was already under the scrutiny of law enforcement. She knew that sooner or later they would find evidence of her guilt. The sun had not yet had time to rise over the horizon when the investigative team set to work at the Ritz-Carlton Sarasota Hotel. The prestigious resort that was supposed to witness the happy beginning of Mark and Leslie Goodwin's new life had turned into a crime scene of chaos and bewilderment. The groom's corpse was discovered less than an hour after the party had ended, and now the police were diligently collecting evidence. Police cordoned off the crime scene, preventing guests from entering that wing of the hotel. Hotel security officials provided footage from surveillance cameras installed on all floors. The forensics team began examining the footage and immediately noticed that Leslie was the last person to enter the room where Mark was later found. The cameras recorded her disappearing down the hallway leading to that very room. This immediately aroused suspicion among investigators. While forensics worked to gather evidence, detectives began interviewing guests who had attended the wedding. Everyone who was questioned said they didn't notice anything strange about Mark's behavior. He socialized with friends and coworkers, drank with the guests, and seemed like a normal, happy groom. Leslie, on the other hand, was acting tense. Some of her acquaintances recalled that she was taciturn, looking upset at times. But no one thought it was anything more serious than the usual pre-wedding nerves. The main thing for the investigation was to find out the motive for the murder. Mark and Leslie looked like a successful and loving couple, but soon details began to emerge that painted a very different picture. A few hours after Mark's body was discovered, police officers gained access to his cell phone. At first, it seemed routine, but what they found turned the course of the investigation upside down. Mark's phone had numerous messages on it from an unknown number. These messages revealed intimate details of his affair with a woman named Sarah, who worked as an assistant at his law firm. The messages were written days before the wedding, and the content of these conversations made it clear that Mark and Sarah were having an affair that lasted several months. This immediately gave the investigation a new vector. Leslie remained at the hotel under informal surveillance the entire time. While the investigators and forensics team collected evidence, she sat in one of the hotel rooms, trying hard to hide her excitement. Her outward calm might have seemed natural, but investigators noticed inconsistencies in her story. Security cameras showed her moving through the hallway at the time of the murder, although she claimed to be in another part of the hotel. Witnesses began to recall more details related to Leslie. One of her close friends told investigators that in the final weeks before the wedding, she repeatedly mentioned jealousy and suspicions of Mark's infidelity. Although she never shared specific details, her mood seemed depressed. No one had taken it seriously, thinking it was just pre-wedding unrest. But now these little things took on new meaning. Investigators scrutinized the room where Mark was found. There were no signs of a struggle, indicating that the shot had been fired unexpectedly to the victim. The gun that killed Mark was already lying at the police station. Its registration was in Leslie Goodwin's name, further complicating her situation. Forensics determined that the shot was fired at close range, possibly less than a meter. This confirmed the assumption of a surprise attack. Faint traces of blood were found on the carpet in the room, stretching from Mark's body to the door. But the more important find for the investigation was a woman's earring left under the couch, exactly like the ones Leslie had worn on her wedding day. That earring, along with video footage of Leslie being seen near the room, became a key piece of evidence for the investigation. They now had a direct link between Leslie and the crime scene. The next day, investigators continued their work, gathering statements from hotel staff and guests. One of the receptionists recalled that Leslie seemed extremely agitated on the eve of the wedding day and even went outside several times to talk on the phone. A check of her phone records revealed that she had been having long conversations with an unknown caller whose number turned out to be tied to an old friend of Leslie's, a man named Thomas, with whom she had been in a close relationship before meeting Mark. When investigators discovered that Leslie had been in contact with Thomas in the hours before the murder, they called him in for questioning. Thomas claimed that Leslie had called him complaining about the upcoming tension and voicing her concerns about Mark's fidelity. According to Thomas, she hinted more than once that if Mark did cheat on her, she would not forgive it. This gave the investigation another important clue. Leslie's jealousy could have been a motive for murder. The investigation continued, and more evidence pointed to the fact that Leslie could have planned Mark's murder in advance. Investigators began checking her shopping history over the past months and discovered that the gun that was used to shoot Mark had been purchased 2 months before the wedding. Leslie explained the purchase by saying she feared for her safety because Mark often faced threats at work, but that argument did not satisfy the investigation. By the time investigators completed the first phase of their work, the picture began to take shape. Leslie had become the prime suspect in Mark's murder. Everything pointed to the fact that the crime had been carefully planned. However, the evidence remained circumstantial. There was a lack of direct evidence that could confirm that Leslie was the one who had fired the shot. As investigators continued to gather evidence, Leslie was detained for further questioning. Her lawyer insisted that she was innocent and that all the evidence was just a coincidence. But the investigation continued, and more details about the couple's life began to surface. It turned out that Mark had cheated on Leslie more than once during the years of their relationship. His affair with Sarah was far from the first. Several women with whom he had affairs confirmed that he repeatedly had relationships on the side, despite his obligations to Leslie. These confessions only strengthened the investigation's position that Leslie may have decided to kill because of heightened jealousy. By the time the case gained momentum, the media had already begun to cover the case extensively. Reporters stood outside Mark's hotel and law office, hoping to get comments from friends and colleagues. The story of a wedding that ended in murder was attracting national attention. Leslie remained under police surveillance, but she has not yet been formally charged. Amid media pressure and public interest, the investigation accelerated. Soon, forensic experts discovered a new important piece of evidence. Microscopic traces of gunpowder were found on Leslie's clothes, indicating that she was in close proximity to the scene of the shooting. Forensics also found traces of Mark's blood on the bottom of her dress, confirming her presence near him at the time of the murder. Forensics also reconstructed the sequence of events from Leslie and Mark's phone records. By examining all calls and messages, they revealed that shortly before the murder, Leslie had sent several messages to Mark insisting that they meet. Although Mark did not respond to these messages, it confirmed that Leslie was trying to get his attention just prior to the murder. With all the available evidence gathered, investigators were ready to formally charge Leslie. By the end of the week, investigators had enough evidence to apprehend Leslie Goodwin. On Friday morning, while she was in her apartment, police formally charged her with the murder of Mark Goodwin. Her lawyer insisted it was a mistaken accusation, but investigators were confident in their story. Leslie was taken to the station for further questioning, which was now to be the final step in the long process of gathering evidence. The interrogation room was brightly lit, and despite Leslie's calm expression, her hands nervously rubbed the hem of her dress. On the table in front of her lay a stack of documents: case files, evidence, forensic reports, and phone records. The detectives conducting the interrogation knew there were still a few unresolved issues in the case, but they already had enough to build a strong case. The main evidence remained microscopic traces of gunpowder on Leslie's dress. Forensic experts proved that these traces could not have been accidental. This meant that she was close enough to the gun at the time of the shooting for the powder particles to settle on her clothing. Additionally, traces of Mark's blood found on the bottom of her dress confirmed her presence at the scene at the time of the murder. During questioning, Leslie remained calm, denying her involvement. She claimed she was in the hallway at the time of the murder and did not enter the room. However, video footage from the hotel showing her presence near the room minutes before the shot was fired contradicted her words. Leslie began to contradict herself, which only strengthened investigators' suspicions. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to work through Mark's phone records. Recent text messages sent from his phone confirmed that he was aware of Leslie's suspicions. Key to the case, however, was a call Leslie had made an hour before the murder. She called Thomas, her former lover. This conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and investigators found that during the conversation, Leslie was frank about her plans. In a recording of the call provided by the service provider, Leslie explicitly stated that she was sick of putting up with it and that she would do what needed to be done. These findings conclusively destroyed Leslie's line of defense. The investigation established that she had a motive, jealousy and deceit, that lasted for years. In addition, the evidence indicated that she had acted deliberately and in cold blood. Soon, Thomas was called in for questioning as well. Pressed by the evidence, he admitted that he knew of Leslie's plans. However, he claimed that he perceived her words as a manifestation of emotion and did not believe that she would really go for murder. This confession finally tied up the events of that day. Leslie, embittered and tired of Mark's constant cheating, decided to get rid of him. At the same time that Leslie and Thomas were being interviewed, investigators continued to work on reconstructing a complete picture of the crime. They concluded that on the night of the murder, Leslie had met Mark after he had returned to the room after the party. At this time, he was already drunk and had not anticipated any threat. Leslie, armed with a gun she had purchased in advance, attacked him unexpectedly. Apparently, she shot him while his back was turned to her, as evidenced by the angles of the entry wounds. After the murder, Leslie quickly left the room and, according to the video footage, headed for the elevator, descending to the first floor, where she discreetly left the hotel grounds. However, she did not take into account that the surveillance cameras would record her every move and her behavior would become the subject of intense investigative scrutiny. After gathering all the evidence together, investigators sent the case to the prosecutor's office to prepare a first-degree murder charge. Prosecutors, after receiving the case file, were confident that the charge would be proven in court. Key evidence: gunpowder residue, blood on the dress, videotapes, and Thomas's confession created an impenetrable picture of the crime. The trial began months after Leslie's arrest. Numerous witnesses took the stand, including wedding guests, hotel staff, and forensic experts. They detailed how events unfolded on the night of the murder. The key moment, however, came when the phone records of Leslie and Thomas were presented. Their wiretap was a turning point in the trial, convincing the jury that Leslie acted with the intent to kill. The prosecution also presented hotel video camera footage that clearly showed Leslie moving through the hallways at the moment the shooting occurred. This videotape, coupled with other evidence, left little chance for the defense. After a week of hearings and 3 days of deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. Leslie Goodwin was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Mark Goodwin. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole. The verdict was the logical conclusion to one of the most high-profile cases in the county in recent years. Mark's family, who attended every session of the trial, met the verdict with mixed feelings. On the one hand, they received justice for their son and brother. On the other hand, the gravity of the crime committed on their wedding day added a special bitterness to their loss. The story of Leslie and Mark Goodwin has gone down in history as one of the most shocking tragedies to occur in Sarasota. It was a story of love that turned into jealousy, and jealousy that ultimately led to murder.